G'day, mate.
How's it going?
Really good, yeah. I'm so changing always location from where I'm, recording this from, yeah. And today, I hope actually that you'll do everything you can to make sure my volume is good, because I'm in a situation where I've got to really relatively keep my voice down. Where I am recording it, just in the moment, so I was able to just get to a spot. But are we ready to go on with the show, mate?
The show will go on.
Yeah, because I reckon that we could be just wondering if, of course, bears are not really meant to eat out of rubbish bins, Certainly bears are not meant to eat out of rubbish bins. But to see bears eating out of rubbish bins, I guess is natural, but perhaps rubbish bins shouldn't be there. If the rubbish bins weren't there, then the bears wouldn't be eating out of the rubbish bins, sort of thing, But if water, up in the heavens and everything was meant as a river to be dammed and sort of moved around by people controlling that, shouldn't those things perhaps be looked into? I mean, bears are eating out of rubbish bins, and there's all of these rivers and everything is sort of being dammed in the past and stuff. And I think a lot more awareness comes, or there's more awareness now. But damming things doesn't necessarily really help, and then directing things up in the heavens, which is not natural, really. That doesn't help at all, But not recognising that bears are not really meant to eat out of rubbish bins, that's not really natural, But if we were meant to sort of use dirty fuel, when can we use clean fuel? I mean, certainly there's lots of ideas that's all about clean fuel, but if just petroleum is out there, and you have a system really that's not supportive of people working, right? Yeah, so the hand above doesn't care much about clean fuel or even a more free energy, which, why shouldn't it be called free energy? I mean, if it's free energy, then apparently that might be a dirty word now, because it doesn't fit necessarily in a paradigm of a goat jumping on top of another goat, Yeah, so you've got sort of paradigms, paralysis sometimes going on here, and people are sort of really need to learn more what's natural, and they need to absolutely know what's unnatural, and to leave the unnatural, and to leave the supernatural too, because I think it's just a bit too much of a focus on all that other stuff. I think people should really be just focused on what's natural. Yeah. Anyway, that's an idea. But how do we account for the condition, that just arises from money being grown from debt to all the public, but not to the person who's in the private? They were able just to grow it from nothing themselves, and then for the money to come into the public has to borrow it all, and so the public just goes into debt more and more and more and more and more, you see. But anyway, that's the plantation script, and that money is controlled just like water sort of being dammed up in the heavens, and all this sort of thing. It's amazing to me that the Queen, her consciousness, of course, she's living for 4 years, because her brain fed proper nutrient and everything, and it develops areas of herself. The workers, they live, 3-4 weeks, and the Queen, she can have a consciousness for 4 years and have a relation even with, for instance, that we can see a beekeeper there. And you've got a relation of the beekeeper with the Queen, and she can have a sense of the emotion of what's more maybe supernatural for the worker bees, of a relation with the beekeeper, But it's amazing to me that these tiny little red-eyed tree frogs, when they lay their eggs in the little branches above the water, and they're light branches that can't support the weight of a snake. And I guess that's part of their strategy, and to avoid that. And the eggs, the little ones that are forming in there, they can sense if a snake is close by or something. And if it is, then they can have broken out of their shell sort of and fallen into the water and escaped.
Okay, well, let's see. Maybe Dr. Job is in an area where there's no service or something. He still seems to be on the line, so let's hope that he comes back.
Are you there?
Hey, yes.
Okay, yeah. Now something's going on with his phone, so that's something, isn't it? I'm doing it from phone, but it's going out all the time, and I don't know why, but see if you can say a problem of it.
Okay.
We were just talking about the deadly dodder plant. The deadly dodder plant doesn't have any roots, but the deadly dodder plant that doesn't have any roots or limbs, it's like a bit of a snake, but it's actually a plant. But it doesn't have any limbs or leaves. And it's so amazing because the plant, it pulls its roots out of the ground, and let's see, and it parasitically sort of can advance itself toward a tree that's higher around it that it climbs up. It wraps around. And it's also evolved scales. And plants have animal-like sort of traits. And there's a very specific sort of human-like traits and things, and animals have these specific sensibilities. You've got half an inch flatworm as a planarian, and that has a central nervous system, and in experiments where those little planarians were conditioned to bright light, and then a tiny little electricity was given to them. That's not good, is it? But when it did, they curled up a little. They survived, of course, because it was done like that. But they curled up in the response, and then soon only just the bright light was needed to affect the planarian's ability to curl up. And then when those planarians had learned that, and the information was ground and fed to other planarians, a lot of them, just when the bright light was shone, they also curled up. So you've got a great intelligence that's sort of being passed on, is what I'm saying, and an awareness that can be within a living being of a consciousness that is in varying degrees and levels. Yeah. So even if the planarian ate the material that was of other planarians that had learned that response, a planarian fed another's life colloid building blocks as food also got the same effect, remembered in its conditioned response, and it would curl up, in response to bright light. Just the same, all it needed was the information itself to be passed on, and not necessarily the experience that perhaps created the awareness. Yes, so that's true, isn't it? People can have had a range of experiences that cause them to be able to see layers of necessariness for something to have come to be the way it is, and not any just one thing of itself in isolatedness, and that, this is very subjective, not objective. But in an 80-year-old, Lukey, everybody listening, they can certainly reach the age of over 100, but that, the average 80-year-old, there's like 50 million cells sort of having apoptosis every second. I mean, that sounds like a lot, doesn't it? 50 million cells per second. That's on average, in an average 80-year-old. And that could be really slowed down a lot and be not occurring quite like that at all. But we can see that a person's body, from bile occlusion and inflammation of the intestine, and other than having learned and applied live food, can have affected people. But if we can think about it, it's interesting because you can see a picture of things that having occurred or occurring through time. But if the average 80-year-old has 50 million cells dying per second, and only those, how many is replaced, with 50 mil dying per second, it can be that only 30 million cells are being replaced per second. And so you've got things like that going on. And then you've got, typically, as an 80-year-old, there can have been more than half, at least, of all the muscle weight that they had. That can have all be gone, which we could talk about. 10% loss of the weight of the brain, which is pretty radical. And in it, nerves and things can have shrunk. Nerve junctions and things can have shrunk by about maybe 25% or more. You've got an average 80-year-old, and they certainly are around about 75% or more less air than they had when they sort of really were fit more. So that's pretty radical. There's a 35% loss of blood, and these are sort of physiological calculations that have been done, that learned helplessness and having gone through life are not really with a good, strong electric force and muscle testing, strong kinesiologically, persons can have, other than learned how to have had personal responsibility for the genesis of peace within them, which these shows what we're doing is talking about this. But if the average 80-year-old has 35% less blood and there's 50% less kidney function, all we can just say is that certainly an 80-year-olds are becoming, not necessarily keeping their fitness, which they can. And then what we've really been talking about is that all thinking and unnecessarily, and that eye awareness is you and I being able to have a process of investigation, that through applying this process of investigation, you can have cleared away your own story to nothing, so that you're doing things and you're not really coming from any story in yourself at all. Yeah. And that this is what eye awareness is, which 50% of yourself is balanced to be empty and eternal, and the other 50% is caring, and that's your physical self. And this is equivalent to truth, which is mutually beneficial, and with being with mutual, what's mutual and in beneficialness. And now, just keep in mind, as we're listening, that we've been talking in other shows, of course, and we would bring this up into the future as well, that the negative bias of the brain being given that we've talked about. then that adds that being the case, which we've talked about how that arose and how that makes sense that it would be this way. But then when one is living in a system of a goat jumping on top of another goat, you really do need eye awareness because there's a negative bias of the brain given. And then there needs to be an active effort to be healed and be remained healed of all that negativity and aversion and having gone through life other than integrated and congruent, having congruent behaviour. So we're going to be in our shows continuously talking about whole brain functioning, and whole brain functioning is about whole meaning verbal and non-verbal patterns, brain referring to leadership and direction, and functioning being a sustainableness, and ecologicalness. So whole brain functioning is about verbal and non-verbal patterns that allow us to live in the whole of ourselves, and we can be learning what these preferred modes of sorting information is, and applying these. And so that can be an active effort in being healed up of negativity and that background norepinephrine, epinephrine, cortisol, and adrenocorticotropic hormone, and those stress substances that could have been released in the past from word usage and syntax, that we're going to be learning more about behaviour. But clinical observation shows over 40 years or more that I've observed things, certainly it's clinically observed that people's immune system becomes stronger. They have a quality of life index scores much, much higher. They have a much better cardiovascular condition and mood optimization, and they remain more vassal in themselves, in their being, you see. So there's a whole range of things which involves this active effort, which involves your being in affection as you could be listening, and that you're then speaking through listening, and you're listening, and you're doing listen speak. I mean, you're speaking to listening only. Otherwise, it's called ironing a shirt with a fish. And there's lots of storytellers that maybe have been just learning how to not iron a shirt with a fish. Yeah. But as you apply whole brain patterning more in yourself, you know that you're not all that negativity, not at all, and that something very, very beautiful and divine exists, and you're in the presence of this. That's all, and that's all. Nothing else is needed. But this special effort for kids, children, and people should be able to see a way out. And this way out is through eye awareness and your ability to be able to manage a world where eye awareness can have not been put because eugenics has caused no learning, and then synthetics and tranquilizers, and people have degrees of scotophobia or nyctophobia, and have a fear, unnecessary fear, represented by fear of the dark and things like that. But a positive remark always goes noticed, and negative remarks just make a constant sort of enemy more, so that's not good. So we've got to really velcro the good and be able to Teflon the negative, and that's an active outward lived meditation. And this simply is you being in divine awareness, and this being existence and uncontained. So we can fund a movement where people can be learning about eye awareness and gender egalitarianism and economic egalitarianism, and we can be carrying that language around us as ever more this way, we can be educating people to do this, because you can be giving everyone an outward lived model of this, a lived expression of it, which is beyond just a simple sort of writing or something. It's multiple, and the multiple aims are being achieved typically just even in a single action by someone that has the skill. But how are we going in our program, Lukey? We've got a bit more time?
We are coming up on 15 minutes left.
Wow, just time goes by so quick, doesn't it? It's unbelievable. Well, everybody, we've got to do everything we can to stop that learned helplessness, and we have to do everything we can to prevent that, from occurring. And eye awareness really can assist to help on this level now, and people can be more healed up from learned helplessness, and then you get back in there and take charge and stop all that other people are driving your path. This is your voice inside which counts, not anything being imparted from the outside. And this is you living in a balanced living spirit, and that's equivalent to your mum and your dad communicating together, even if they didn't stay together necessarily, as that they are able to communicate together is the primary variable as a balanced adult. How's that? That makes sense to me. And so one should do everything they can to keep your lines of communication and things, because otherwise people have a tendency to do what they can to have fortified and run their strategy of isolatedness and that sort of thing. So it takes quite a bit of a vigilance, doesn't it? So if we can think about, let's see, 4 points just right now that all is about healing learned helplessness. One is sort of living in your balanced spirit as I aware, which we've been talking about, and that your mum and your dad are communicating with each other, and communication is very important. And then when that's not happening, it's sort of that isn't right, and that creates disturbedness. The second thing would be reflecting on the positive more, and velcroing the positive and Tefloning the negative, and that's equivalent to your intention being grown ever more. Number 3 could be your intention being equivalent to your actions, and your action being equivalent to a movies being run, and these being equivalent to wiring and wiring together, firing together, and wiring together, and a neural potentiation of a pattern which you care to have, in your life. And having good brain fun. You there?
Oh, sorry, Dr. W, I'm here.
Okay, so, and love really is equivalent to its own word. Maybe we should just replace the word God with love for the next 40 years. But love is equivalent to its own reward, and this is equivalent to being not of any burden. Yeah. And so in our originalness. And so any hurt that would have been, as it can have been, that was sort of equivalent to the boulder that began, and that could have been imaginary, often it is, but then it could have been something out there too, but these are not, these are multiple factors in their createdness, and not any just one thing by itself. But a boulder came, and there was a stickiness of a bit of chewing gum when you were sliding down the play slide of life, and then when that happened, you try to make sense of that, and that hurt sort of thing or whatever, and then people could have become the holder of the hurt, and then they thought they were the holder of that hurt, and then that would be equivalent to having need and things. But the first hurt being equivalent to being not held of any nature much is equivalent not for having any need either much, and connecting more on a level of soul rather than role. Otherwise, there's lots of need for and that. But splinter and rebutting and splintering things and rebutting and little mini battles of things, that's not a good strategy. It's better to find the weakest link and go there and then show and see how that costs a lot, unless it is resolved. But we should do everything we can to ever be aware that people are doing not necessarily the right thing. They don't know, and so in the end they would be forgiven. So they may as well be forgiven beforehand anyway. But eye awareness really is more your activeness in your being from people already being forgiven. Yeah, so that's not something that's a hiccup to you. But not being passive, in silence, that's equivalent to no harm allowed. So you're not being passive in your silence, but then this is equivalent to no harm being allowed, you see. But eye awareness is where you're having a beautiful ability for your heart to be guiding your tongue, and this is equivalent to being eye aware. And then we just don't have to think about anything because the heart will guide your tongue. But as children, we can be cultivating whole brain functioning patterns and eye awareness and focusing on growing a positive and developing a history and richness of experience that you draw upon as a history that keeps you ever more focused in your positive. But that 50% of yourself is empty and 50% of yourself is caring, and that's a balanced person. So 50% empty and 50% your sensory motor complex and the physical senses of everything. And then how do you do that? 50% of yourself is moving toward things, having things within and using direction more this way, being more associated, that is, rather than being dissociated, having focus on what's outside or away from. But I think it's important that we can be focused on what we can be accepting of and be accepted. Yeah. And then you've got a buffer to all that stress. You've got nice buffers. You're taking personal responsibility for the genesis of peace, and at the end of our session here, you're just feeling better, and you might not know why, but you just do, and if this making sense to you, you don't necessarily have to be able to recall it, though the more that you do this, the more you're learning how to teach others and become more conscious of it yourself. But, unconsciously, this going in, you just start to affect everything underneath, of itself. But becoming aware of how you can be priming your brain, so as you sat down, what emotion you had to do your work, what emotion that you had before you do something, this is called priming, and this can be something which enhances, or it could have just distracted, because people could have been other than priming themselves for success. They can be dragging the history around and putting it in front, and they can have not had success with the history, so they just drag the history around and put it in front. And that's sort of a priming. But priming, that's a magnifying of what's positive as it can be, and a focus on what's more resourceful and inclusive, is more whole brain functioning and sorting in a direction to move more toward rather than away. So it's a matter of really what you can magnify, and magnifying the positive and shrinking the negative, because we really do have, the brain is set up to have sort of like a net. So tap the total potential of what's sort of unused, and it's possible to rewire over time with whole brain functioning, patterning more, and eye awareness, which is really skills that someone has as they're doing something in their excellence, And so this is just really an investigation and a report to you of the things that people do excellently. But if you're doing this then you're keeping that 1% every day of your life, and that adds up to at the end of your life, and then you're preventing learned helplessness, and you're causing the world and everyone around you, including yourself, to be more eye-aware. And this is medicine being equivalent more to your intention and what you're doing, and this is more equivalent to you being more in control of your aging and having the ability to be able to be more in your youth. So inner quiet probably is the major common denominator, or one of the major common denominators of living a long life. So eye awareness is equivalent to you being of more reduced fatigue and not of any collected sort of knots and things. And eye awareness really is equivalent to body energy flowing again. And eye awareness really is equivalent to the water reserves noticeably increasing again. And eye awareness is equivalent to deficiencies having cleared away and efficiency remains. And that happens as a result of that 1% that you can be kept of, which ordinarily would be lost every year. Somebody can have lost 1% of themselves. By the time they're 100, they've got lost 100% of themselves. But eye awareness really is equivalent to each breath being 50% more efficient versus less efficient, you know. And if you can go ahead and feel yourself, and if you test strong for a food that can be useful to you, but if you're testing weak and spongy, even if you like it, but electrically you test weak, that could be something that actually can have been occurring. But some leaders really give you a good, strong kinesiological test, muscle test, and others sort of really weak. And then you could assist now by taking personal responsibility more for the genesis of peace, you know. And we can be, as we go through the program, we can be learning more about what to do and with learned helplessness, and going beyond just the idea of causality, but that, you know, things are much more subjective and not objective at all. So we should let objectiveness go to be aware that things are much more subjective. But the eugenics of all the negativity and the fear-based sort of media stuff can it be responsible of itself for scotophobia and nyctophobia conditions, and then people not really being able to sleep properly or have a deep brainwave sleep patterning, so they can have respiration occur properly, you know, of their brain cells and everything, and tranquilizers and synthetics ever cause more zombified and other problems that we've been talking a bit about in our other program, and then they can cause a loss of learning and memory, and loss of spatial ability and the capacity a person has to be able to work with complexity and things. But I is all-seeing, and the happiness and love and wisdom is am, and that is not equivalent to a bureaucite, and bureaucites could really just only have one wave, one brain wave, and so the all-seeing I connecting with a one brain wave doesn't fit, and the one brain wave can be so frightened of all of that, it's radical. You know, so the all-seeing eye has to connect with the all-seeing eye, you see, or one brainwave connecting with one brainwave. But likeness is being joined with like. But interest and pleasure create whole brain functioning, and only as you're having interest and pleasure do you have your whole brain lit. Otherwise, that flame that's burning in the front of the brain that keeps the mantle of your brain bright, you can see it for several miles away, all of a sudden just could have gone out, perhaps in the past or maybe in the future, where you other than remain in eye awareness and the value of framing things positively, and that every single word we use has a physiology and you live what we speak, and you speak what we live next. And there's a syntax, and that syntax can be more whole brain patterning or not. But Eclipse is a moratorium that we can have, which is a breathing space. And let's tick the box, yes, you want reform in banking, that's all. Most everybody knows that we need reform in banking, and then a lot of this other stuff can be cleared up because you have constitutional money. But can you have a positive impact on all around you? You can, as a result of your applying of whole brain functioning principles. So as you sort toward, as you focus on what's interesting, as you have a language more that's inclusive, and as you have the ability to be able to give rather than be about taking, and that means being able to forgive deeply people around and live with others being more already forgiven, because you only can have opportunity available. But divine awareness is existence, and that's uncontained rather than being contained. We're having a show, and our shows have been about velcroing the good and Tefloning the negative, and learning how to be more empathic. Right. So we're going to be learning a bit about body language, how the body is used to access state-specific behaviour and things in our shows that's coming up. We're going to be talking a little bit about excellence and the physiology of excellence and intelligence. And so we're going to be doing some shows all about intelligence, which intelligence is the ability to go beyond prefixed patterns of response, to be able to survive. So we're going to have some shows that's all about this. I think it's just the last little minute. We can wonder, bears certainly are not meant to be eating out of rubbish bins, and the water being controlled up in the heavens with HARP and all the chemtrail plasma electric stuff in the sky might not really be necessarily good for, controlling the water that's up there, or even having over the horizon sight and stuff, which just is a lot of money spent in the military-industrial complex. And more money needs to be spent more on basic education and things like this, yeah. But anyway, we need to have more eye awareness, and we need to create ever more movement, and we need to have an eclipse, and as we have these eclipses that are coming up. But anyway, it's moratorium time. Let's take a breather space, and as we have these eclipses that are coming up. But anyway, it's moratorium time. Let's take a breather space, and as we have these eclipses that are coming up. But anyway, it's moratorium time. Let's take a breather space, and